with right now. The Occupy movement is all over the place. They have no regard for your and our rights. If we're trying to cross the street, they'll block it. If they have to block traffic, it makes no difference to them. Somehow, we've reached a point where this government, and this is Barack Obama, who allows these things to happen, up to and including the new Black Panther Party posting people at a polling site with clubs. I mean, I know you've seen the video. I have of those two black gentlemen standing there in the most threatening way possible. People admitted that it intimidated them and they didn't vote, and yet there was no prosecution. But Bernardine Dorn and Bill Ayers, who we have significant evidence that they were involved in the Park Police Station bombing that resulted in the death of a police officer, are no closer to being prosecuted than they were 20 or 30 years ago.
Well, expanding on that, I know you worked with the FBI. They've certainly, have their own problems. They've been caught provocateuring and things. I've seen a lot of evidence that the FBI has provocateured some of these new Black Panther Party, type groups. I mean, I don't know how they do get away with that, because I know this: if I did something like that, I would be arrested very quickly. It came out Hal Turner, the big white supremacist, was like an FBI minion, and my whole point is the FBI itself today is run by people that were the types that were in the Weather Underground. So, what do you say about those agencies today?
And, I can't say, Alex. I can tell you this from my own personal experience. I was controlled by the FBI to the extent that sometimes I had to do what I knew I had to do, even though they had instructed me differently. Remember, the FBI I was dealing with was the one that had dealt with the Communist Party, USA, during the 50s, and they were still in the coat and the tie and the hat. And, all of a sudden in the late 60s and the early 70s, we had the hippie generation and people with long hair and beards. And agents weren't even allowed to let their hair grow long. They were still expected, to have a short haircut and to wear suits and ties. And I tried to explain to them then, and of course, in what I had to do in order to infiltrate the Weathermen, a lot of times I had to go contrary to what they had instructed me. But the one thing they always emphasized was that I was not to come up with the plan, that I had to let the plan develop, and I was allowed to add to it as it developed, but I couldn't be the instigator. Now, what you're telling me is today that there's FBI agents who are actually provocateurs, and frankly, if that's the case, I disagree with it most heartily. But I can tell you that the agents I know, and most of them today, are retired. So I can't speak for the current crop.
Sure, they weren't provocateuring. They were actually, if you're in a planning session and they've hatched the plan and they want your ideas, then obviously you're allowed to talk to them, but you're not supposed to say, "Hey, let's go blow up a bank" or something.
Yes, exactly. Once they say, "Hey, let's go blow up the bank," then you're allowed to say, "Well, we probably need a getaway car and we need explosives," but you can't be the one that comes up with the idea. And I adhered to that.
Why have they been protected? Some of them went to prison, thanks to your testimony and others, but now they're out of jail, pardoned by Clinton. Some of them never went to jail, standing on American flags in magazines. That's supposedly cute.
Yeah.
It's so ridiculous.
Well, Bill Ayers is in that magazine standing on the flag, and the caption is, "Guilty as hell, free as a bird, isn't America wonderful?" It's almost spitting in our face, isn't it? Here's what happened. The FBI used tactics that were authorized by the government during the 30s and the 40s, wiretaps and illegal entries. They call them surreptitious entries.
Snake and pigs.
Yes, bag jobs, and they would go in, and what they were doing was looking for evidence. They weren't trying to find something that would convict someone. They just wanted to find out if the bad guy had been there. Well, when that came out, especially in front of the Frank Church Committee during the 80s, that came up with all kinds of controls over the intelligence agency that ultimately led to 9/11. Basically, what happened, Frank Church Committee said these intelligence agencies can no longer communicate with one another. So when the FBI found out that there was people in Arizona learning to fly airplanes but not learning to land them, they couldn't tell the Army or the CIA who had information, similar information from other locations.
But see, that's what's ridiculous about all this. I mean, they use that as an excuse to let operations not be known about because then they want the pretext to take our liberties. But, I mean, I don't care. If I worked in some agency and I knew something was going on, I would make sure something got done about it, even if I got fired. I mean, I don't get to take Fast and Furious. They haven't even gotten in trouble for that.
There's a prime example, Alex. Fast and Furious. You talk about a numbskull idea in operation. The idea was that they were going to let legal, licensed gun dealers sell guns illegally. And they even encouraged them to do it. And then they were going to trail the guns like it was going to be an easy job. Come on. You know, you buy a truckload of guns and suddenly they start heading in 15 directions. How many agents do you have to follow them? And lo and behold, they wind up over in Mexico. And then one of our Border Patrol agents winds up dead, and they find out it's one of the guns from Fast and Furious. Guess what? The Justice Department and our Attorney General says, gee, I didn't know anything about that.
And then they get caught lying, and then they get caught saying in memos they were going to use it against the Second Amendment.
And then he refuses to appear before Congress using executive privilege. Doesn't that sound like Watergate? It sure does.
It does, Larry. Let me ask you this, then we're going to go to a few phone calls here for people that have been patient, want to talk to you. What in your gut or your research, what type of dirty trick or false flag or October surprise, knowing these people that influence the current criminals in charge, what type of stuff would they pull to stay in power?
Well, I think the sky's the limit, but my own opinion is that the Occupy movement, although it's been very quiet through this summer, I think it's going to get noisier and noisier, and I think that's going to wind up being the catalyst. I think there's going to be more acts of violence as things go on, particularly around polling places and political meetings. It'll be a combination of the extreme right and the Occupy movement that ultimately causes Barack Obama to say, hey, the elections have to be suspended and martial law declared. Now, that's complete speculation, and recognize this. The more exposure that we give this, the less likely it is to happen. You know, a rat doesn't like light. And these guys from Chicago, they may have good plans and they may be good rats, but they don't like light. And the more light we shine on them, the less likely it is that they'll try to do what they're planning.
Well, again, you know, you talk about elements of the extreme right and left. I mean, there was organic movements in Occupy, but the White House basically tried to take it over. And then you've got groups trying to infiltrate right-wing groups, getting people in fights. We caught the White House trying to provocateur in the Trayvon Martin case in there agitating, trying to get some type of race war going. I mean, it's so diabolical. But it didn't work. It didn't work.
No, and understand, Alex, that this administration has done everything in its power to make sure that the division exists. They have done absolutely nothing to try to unite races, classes, or different groups of people. They have emphasized the differences and tried to make that a cutting edge. So, you know, it makes perfect sense. And But understand, there are people on the extreme right that are just as crazy as the people on the extreme left. And then you've got these guys in the middle who are trying to manipulate all of it, and that's Barack Obama. And it's like, gee, what string do we pull over here on the right? What string do we pull over here on the left? And boy, wouldn't it be good to get both of these groups in a confrontation on the streets of Washington?
Yeah, that's what a lot of our sources are saying. They want to get some type of civil unrest going and then clamp down and play the part of the referees when they staged it all to begin with. Larry Grathwohl's our guest for this segment. The next, we're going to go to your calls right now. But Larry, give people your website if they want to follow the work you're involved in. Yeah, Larry. Yeah, let's get Larry on air right now. Go ahead, Larry. Start over.
Okay. Larry 101st.blogspot.com.
Again, that's Larry101stblogspot.com. Excellent website. Let's go to some phone calls here. Let's go ahead and talk to Leon in Illinois. You're on the air. Welcome and thanks for holding. Lennon.
Hi. Look, we've just let this go too far. I mean, I think basically after all the hubbub, after, spending however many late nights searching up articles with coffee, the last thing that we can all agree on is that it's just gone too far. So I've got a comment for Larry, I've got a comment for the audience, and I've got a comment for you, Mr. Jones.
Sure, go ahead.
You say that Bill Ayers says that there's going to be a time coming up soon at which the United States is going to change, and it's going to change dramatically, and it's not going to go back to the way it was. And you know what? I completely agree with him. 100% I do agree with him, because I, unlike him, still believe that human beings can actually do something when they put their minds to it.
But you don't want to have a communist put you in a slave camp so they can walk around and feel powerful? You don't want him ruling over you?
Absolutely not. Because I know that regardless of all the ego Mr. Larry is talking about, regardless of all the ego that those guys have, that ego comes out of that pathetic little sense of fear that they need to feel.
And by the way, Larry is a psychologist in his bio. I didn't. That's not even on the bio on his site, but he's also a psychologist. That's why he can analyze the ego of these people. Yeah, that's what I found is these are weak, grasping, power-tripping people who want to dominate others. They don't get real power is when you convince people to like you and want to be around you because you're a nice person and have cool ideas. That's where real power comes from, and then you're ashamed of all the power you get. And in fact, what would you say about the Weatherman type people? I mean, what's their basic psychology, Larry?
Well, they want to be in control. They want power. Bill Ayers wants to be Joseph Stalin. I used to marvel at the fact that, when he would walk into a room, it was like God had appeared and people would shut up and wait for him to speak. Now, keep in mind that we're supposed to be a socialist, communist organization and everybody's equal. But then how come it is that everyone shuts up when Bill or
Sure.
Jeff
How could you act like, how could you keep a straight face and sit there and act like you were sycophantically listening to him? Because I would imagine if you didn't sycophant, they wouldn't keep you in there. I mean, how did you do it? Just overdo it? Oh, your graciousness. Oh.
No. What I did is I played my role. Remember, the Weathermen had attended meetings in Cuba and in North Vietnam where they were criticized for recruiting academics and that they hadn't recruited veterans and working class people. And here I was, and I knew that call it instinct, that this was what they were interested in me for. So I played that role. I remember sitting in meetings, and I had a straight razor that I used to carry in my hip pocket, and I used to take it out and flip